Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, July 3rd.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
Looking at significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean, we see a gale pushing into the Antarctic ice shelf, not doing anything. We see the beginnings of a new gale starting to develop while pushing under New Zealand. This one offers some hope and is the tease for more to come. Let's get into the details. We'll start by looking at jet stream level winds. These winds of about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales when they form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a push in the jet to the north. Here's the southern branch. Here's the northern branch. The southern branch really isn't pushing at all to the north, but typically if it were, like right here, maybe just a little bit, that would help create a clockwise flow aloft and down the ocean surface. That's the hallmark of low pressure in the southern hemisphere. And low pressure, if it's deep enough, generates winds. Winds, if they're strong enough over a large enough area, generate seas. Seas, as they radiate away from the fetch area towards your beach, turn into swell. And swell, when it hits your beach, turns into surf. So we don't really have a trough here, but we know there's some sort of low pressure trying to develop here. Let's put this into motion. Now, as we get into Monday, you'd see that the northern branch and the southern branch are joining here at this spot. New Zealand's right under there. That's creating some energy, and that's probably what's helping to fuel gale development in that location. And you see the beginnings of a trough starting to form well south of Tasmania, and that is supposed to build, and there we go as we get into Monday night and Tuesday, and that's a legitimate trough right there with winds at 140 knots pushing up into it, supportive of gale development, and that trough continues off to the east into Tuesday night and Wednesday, July 6th, actually looking pretty good on Wednesday, and even into almost Thursday, with decent winds still at 140 plus knots flowing up into its that'd be its northwest flank, supporting gale development and supporting winds pushing off to the northeast, and then starting to crash some on Friday. But still, look at that, quite present. But notice this big ridge pushing south here over the southeast Pacific. That'll do nothing in this area, but offering some hope there. And then we move out beyond Saturday into Sunday, the 10th of July. Another trough tries to organize, but the ice line's right about 63 south, something like that, so probably not getting any traction. And then sweeping off to the east, that becomes a zonal flow, or if not, a ridge, and likely offering nothing. But looks like we have a pretty good window of opportunity here for the next 4 to 5 days. Let's go take a look down at the surface and see what effect the jet stream is going to have on surface level winds. Okay, so here we go. Surface level winds, surface level pressure. We know there's some fetch right there, 40 knots pushing under New Zealand, kind of aimed almost southeast, not even east. And a little bit of fetch sort of aimed off to the east, trying to do something. But there we go. As we get into Sunday night, late tonight, that'd be the 3rd, early on the 4th, 45 to 50 knot winds are forecast developing, blowing from the southwest, and continuing into Monday, the July 4th. And pushing off to the east, offering good opportunity for swell development. And another system, we're actually going to go back one frame here, develops on Monday night, that'd be July 4th, with 45 knot west to southwest winds. That too continues into Tuesday. The main fetch falls south. A secondary fetch develops with 40 knot winds aimed off to the northeast. Then all of it sort of integrates into one cohesive low as we get into Wednesday, July 7th, with 40 to 45 knot winds aimed well off to the northeast, and actually lifting off to the northeast as we get into Wednesday evening, and then all that starting to fade as we get into Friday. Little bits of fetch hanging on, remaining, but not a whole lot. Another gale tries to develop east of New Zealand on Saturday, only 35 knot south winds, maybe some background swell, certainly swell for Tahiti, but Hawaii, maybe. You really need 40 knot winds to get enough period to do something of real interest. Another gale develops as we get into Sunday night, that'd be the 10th of July. All fetch aimed off to the east, and again, almost over the ice line. The models have been unsure how to deal with this. Some of the last run showed it pretty good. This run, not so good. So we'll have to keep our eyes on it. Still a week out. All right, let's go on. So we're going to look at significant wave heights for the past week, Sunday, a week ago, the June 26th. And that was, we knew there was a gale in the central South Pacific. It generated swell that's been hitting first Hawaii, then California, pretty much all but faded out in California now. Over the past week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, there's this little gale that developed here in the far southeast Pacific on Wednesday. Maybe some background swell will radiate up into the most exposed breaks in Southern California, but tiny is the operative word in terms of size. And then Thursday, Friday, really nothing going on. Saturday, another one of these gales in the deep southeast Pacific, all aimed off to the east, maybe some background swell. But then this gale started developing under New Zealand. That's the one we're sort of keeping our eyes on right now. Maybe some energy pushing towards Southern California. Hawaii pretty much shadowed by it relative to New Zealand. Let's go take a look at the forecast. All right, so looking forward to this evening, 29, almost 30-foot seas, building to 35 feet under New Zealand. Right here, 35.7, the highest seas over this entire domain. So that's good for swell production, both for Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast. Though most of the energy aimed off to the east again, seas building to 40 feet, theoretically over 1 pixel, about 18 Z on Monday, the 4th of July. So that'd be 11 a.m. in the morning. And continuing into Monday evening and fading, but then a secondary or another gale develops under New Zealand as the first one fades out, and seas in the 36-foot range right there, and then secondary fetch developing with 33-foot seas, continuing about like that, 34 feet as we get into Wednesday, the 6th of July, and then pushing off to the northeast with 35 to 36-foot seas and fading out. So a 1-2 punch, 2 swells or 2 gales right in a row, theoretically, that's forecast. Wind is not blowing on the ocean's surface at this moment yet, so no swell is guaranteed, though. If you're within a few days, that probably is good enough, and one can assume some swell will be generated. About a week travel time up to Hawaii, and about 8 to 9 days for the U.S. West Coast. Something to watch. But then after that, things fall apart. We saw it in the upper level models, we see it on the surface models, and we see no other seas of interest forecast. The 180-hour composite forecast, this is if you took the entire model for the entire length of its week-long run and just drew everything all at once, you see a pretty good extent of 30, 32, 34, 36-foot seas, maybe even a little bit more, some little 40-foot notches right in there. So a good portion of the Southwest Pacific at some point over the next week is going to have 30-foot plus seas over it. That certainly should be decent for swell production. Local wind forecast. So what's going on? Notice this. Low pressure off the U.S. West Coast. In fact, it's been pretty cool, at least north of Point Conception. Foggy. There was actually rain. I don't know if you call it rain. Heavy mist in the San Francisco Bay Area. One report we saw was hyping it up to the point of saying nearly record rainfall for this time of year. Well, if more than a few drops fell out of the sky, that would probably be record rainfall. Anyway, pretty deep marine layer in place. Winds out of the northwest, not too bad, 5-10 knots, something like that. Certainly no wind swell production forecast. High pressure, 1034 millibars, driving solid, strong trades into Hawaii today. Tomorrow, pretty much the same thing for California, same thing for Hawaii. Strong trades there. As we get into Tuesday, the 5th of July, again, the low pressure eking over, pushing over Northern California. Light wind regime, trades back off a little bit for Hawaii. Wednesday, pretty much the same deal, lightning trades for Hawaii. As we get into Thursday, July 7th, still the same, no real wind swell. I mean, that's kind of a good thing. We're just sick of the wind blowing over North and Central California. Yeah, it makes wind swell, but it's been driving water temperatures down. We've actually had a bit of a rebound lately. Water temperatures are tolerable in most locations now. Anyways, we get into Friday. Pretty much the same deal. Trades lighter for Hawaii. Saturday, notice theoretically some sort of a tropical system pushing through into maybe the Hawaii swell window. Northwest winds start building 15 to 20 knots along the north and central California coast, and a pretty long fetch of 15-knot east winds pushing into the Hawaiian Islands, good for wind swell. Sunday, building fetch 25 knots off of Northern California. That's good for wind swell along the north and central California coast. And then more trades and trade wind swell for the Hawaiian Islands with a tropical system, if it actually forms, fading out. Let's move on. The snow forecast dashboard, we're not looking for any snow, not expecting any. We're really looking at, this is for the Pacific Crest Trail crossing where it crosses with Tioga Pass Road. Freezing level down a bit, down to 12,000 feet, slowly working its way up into the 13,000 foot range. So we get into late on the 4th of July, into the 5th. And then by the time we get to the 7th of July, back to summer-like conditions and warming temperatures. And one can use this sort of as a proxy for the whole state. Warming temperature, less fog, and freezing level much higher if you're hiking on the Pacific Crest Trail. All right, so let's go take a look long-term. What's going on with the Madden Julian Oscillation and, of course, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. We're looking for signs of the active phase of the Madden Julian Oscillation, that periodic weather oscillation that travels around the planet from west to east on the equator. The active phase on one side of the planet, the inactive phase on the other. They rotate opposite of each other around the planet. When the active phase pushes over the Pacific, it's good. It feeds energy to the jet stream, which in turn can feed storm production. It also can reverse trade winds when it's over the West Pacific. That in turn can produce a Kelvin wave, that's taking warm water that's in the West Pacific, pushing it east under the equator from the West Pacific to the East Pacific. Successive active phases of the MJO can produce successive Kelvin waves, which can redistribute the balance of warm water in the Pacific from the West Pacific to the East Pacific off of the Galapagos and Ecuador. Of course, that's how you get El Nino. And of course, El Nino, when it happens, then fundamentally changes the jet stream, imparts more energy to it, and in winter months certainly does a lot for feeding storm production and storm and water fall into California. Also, it changes what we talked about this before, the Walker circulation. The updraft of the Walker circulation can move from the Indian Ocean over into the West Pacific, and that's sort of what is driving all of it. All right, so right now, we're looking for signs of the active phase of the MJO. This is data from the TAA buoy array, series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino. We're just looking at the arrows, East Pacific here, West Pacific here, that's New Guinea, that's the equator there. The date line, international date line right there. The arrows, long and strong east winds in the East Pacific, over the Central Pacific, and in the West Pacific. Right here in the West Pacific, when the active phase moves over here, this is where trade winds can either reduce speed or switch direction. This is where Kelvin waves can be created. We call it the Kelvin wave generation area. But it's not the actual wind speeds. It's the anomalies, difference from normal for this time of year, because winds blow stronger or weaker, and depending on the time of year, pretty strong normally. And you can see the arrows, yes, they're out of the east here, but pretty weak. So we'll say modest east anomalies in the East Pacific, getting stronger to moderate over the Central Pacific, and moderate to strong over the Kelvin wave generation area. Probably a pretty good indication of the inactive phase of the MJO being in control. So what's the wind forecast over the Kelvin wave generation area for the next week? 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies, the east-west component of the wind. The blues are easterly anomalies. Consider that the inactive phase of the MJO. Yellows, the west anomalies, the active phase of the MJO. This is the whole planet on one chart, though. Dateline runs right up the middle, so we know where the dateline is. Far East Pacific, about 135 east, so right about there. And the Kelvin wave generation area ends about 170 west, so right about in there. And California is about 120 west, and Ecuador is about 80 west, somewhere over there. But it's just this area in this chart we're interested in. Pretty obvious. Very strong easterly anomalies in control of the Kelvin wave generation area. Westerly anomalies in the active phase of the MJO, just looking at this, all hold up somewhere in the Indian Ocean. And no forecast change for the next 7 days. All right, so let's go look out the next 2 weeks. This is data outgoing long wave radiation. Fancy words for cloud cover. Sunlight reflecting off the ocean surface. If you have more sunlight reflecting off the ocean surface, then you have fewer clouds. One can assume that's high pressure, and one can assume that is the inactive phase of the MJO. The blues, negative anomalies, meaning less sunlight reflectivity off the ocean surface. That would mean more cloud cover. That would mean the active phase of the MJO. That's what we want to see. 5 different charts going, or 4 different panels, 5 days each panel, going out 15 days, about 2 weeks. South America, Central America, Hawaii. Let's see, Equator right there, dateline right there, Kelvin Wave generation area there. We see the active phase of the MJO moving from the maritime continent, trying to get a toe in the door in the West Pacific. 5 days from now, certainly doing that. Active phase in control. Building some 10 days from now and holding 2 weeks from now. This per the statistic model. The dynamic model, here we get them lined up. The dynamic model, not quite so optimistic. A weak active phase, maybe modest in strength, 2 weeks out as compared to the statistic model here, which shows a little bit stronger active phase forecast. So a little bit of disagreement about the models. So both saying the active phase is on the way. Phase diagrams, another way to compare the statistic model and the dynamic model. The MJO moves from west to east from the Indian Ocean to the maritime continent, over the West Pacific to the East Pacific, under the United States, across the Atlantic, over Africa, back to the Indian Ocean. These, let's see, we started here, when is this? Probably May 24th, the whole way through May and June. You can follow the track of the MJO. We're into July now, July 2nd. The active phase right now over the maritime continent. The further away the heavy dot right there, that's what we're looking for, the current state is. The further away from the circle, the stronger it is. So a pretty weak active phase. Forecast by 3 different members, making it to the very far western Pacific and pretty weak for the most part. The dynamic model suggesting some flavor of the same thing, maybe the active phase even weaker still, and not making it as far off to the east as the statistic model. Next up, upper level model, propensity or potential for precipitation. The green areas favorable for precipitation, the reds and oranges dry air. One can assume that would be the inactive phase and the greens would be the active phase. 8 different panels going out 40 days, 5 days each panel. South America, Central America, 0 is the equator. New Guinea there. So we see inactive phase exiting, making its way across the Atlantic. Active phase just trying to get into the West Pacific today. You see it making its way across the Pacific from today through about, we'll say, August 2nd. So the entire month of July actually looks pretty decent in terms of support for gale development. Then as we get into the first week in August, the inactive phase, you can see it. It wraps around the chart from the Atlantic, over Africa, into the Indian Ocean, across the Indian Ocean, and then back into the West Pacific starting about August 7th and into the end of the model, August 12th. We look at the CFS model going out a month. Again, whole planet on one chart, date line running right up the middle. Kelvin Wave generation area, West Pacific starts about 135 east, over to about 170 west, something like that. Okay, the blues are easterly anomalies, the inactive phase, the MJO. Reds and yellows or oranges are westerly anomalies, the active phase. The dotted contour is, in fact, the inactive phase of the MJO. And this is past performance here. This is the forecast down here. You can see the inactive phase of the MJO showed up about a week ago, is making its way over the date line, should be east of the Kelvin Wave generation area proper, maybe in about 2 or 3 days, something like that. Easterly anomalies lingering. The active phase, the solid contour, one can assume it's actually over here today, making its way across. You see westerly anomalies trying to get a finger into the Kelvin Wave generation area, about a week from now, and then backtracking, having a hard time making the jump over the date line itself, and then remanifesting over in the East Pacific, about 2 weeks from now and on beyond that. But easterly anomalies continue pretty solid over the date line in the Kelvin Wave generation area, a classic symptom of La Nina. And then looking even further out, the 3-month CFS model. Past performance is down here. Notice The blues are easterly anomalies, the dateline right there. Blues solidly anchored over easterly anomalies, inactive phase, the MJO, over the dateline. But notice, all of a sudden, just now, the core of those anomalies have shifted off to about 140, 150 west, even south of Hawaii. And that opens the door, if this holds as forecast, for the yellows, westerly anomalies, to slowly start creeping in to the far west Pacific and then holding the dividing line about 150 east, so about halfway through the Kelvin Wave generation area. And this, we think, and we've been saying this for weeks now, as one person said, it's like watching paint dry, and it clearly is. We are waiting for the paint to dry, because when it does, we assume that La Nina will start beginning to fade, moving out of the West Pacific, opening the door for the West Pacific to become more active storm-wise, fed by these westerly anomalies. And sometime in the maybe late September time frame, things will maybe get interesting, but we really think it's not going to be till November or December till things get real interesting. Anyway, let's overlay the MJO. All right, so dotted contour is the inactive phase of the MJO with its associated easterly anomalies. That's supposed to be moving out of the Kelvin Wave generation area. There's the dateline right there, about July, I don't know, 12th or 13th, something like that. You see the very weak active phase trying to weasel its way into the Kelvin Wave generation area over the next couple of days, bringing some westerly anomalies with it, but not too much. The La Nina signature, we're going to get into that in a second, still holds. Inactive phase follows that from about July 19th out till about mid-August, something like that, with easterly anomalies bumping up again, but more focus not on the dateline, but southeast of Hawaii. Then finally, as we get into, I'd say, what is that, about the first week in August, a more robust active phase tries to set up, feeds these westerly anomalies, pushes them a little bit to the west. And even after that, an inactive phase, the westerly anomalies hold, but not fully wiping out La Nina, at least not yet. Now, the low-pass filter. This is where things get interesting. We're going to do a little bit deeper dive this week. All right, so the dotted contour, high-pressure bias. Consider that the downdraft of the Walker circulation, the La Nina signature. Two contours have been in play. They faded recently. Supposed to come back about mid-August. This, we think, might be the last pulse of La Nina. But clearly, holding its ground, not giving up anything, though displaced, the core of it. Notice the winds were over here somewhere, moving more to the east, allowing this black contour, the solid contour, the low pressure bias, and that's what we want. That's the updraft portion of the Walker circulation, still locked at 120 east, but making a little headway, at least in terms of westerly anomalies, into the West Pacific, feeding the storm track perhaps a bit. All right, so where is the low and high pressure bias? Where are they normally located in various different times? We found an archive projections. We're looking at 1982. This was a major El Nino year, the first major El Nino that really got everybody's attention. This is data sort of, how would you say it, hindcast data that's somewhat made up, but it gives you a good sense of what's going on. The low pressure bias was at 150 east, okay, at the beginning of the year in January of 82. And as El Nino set up, you see the low pressure bias building and becoming fully anchored at about 150 west, 140 west, while the high pressure bias sits over 120 east. Today, we're totally reversed. Where this is where the low pressure bias is today, and over here, this is where the high pressure bias is. But you can see as El Nino builds, the low pressure bias shifts off to the east. Let's go look at some other years. Now we go to 1983 when El Nino collapsed. The low pressure bias completely filling the Pacific Basin from 170 east into Ecuador and massively strong. And then as we get into August, you see it go from here shifting the whole way to the other side of the planet into the Indian Ocean, 120 east, and the high pressure bias starting to build as we get into December right over the core of the East Pacific. So a big shift. Let's look at a couple more. Now here's 1987, another El Nino year, the core of the low pressure bias right smack over the date line and holding there. Not working its way. Yeah, it has some ice or some contours here pushing into the East Pacific, but the core of it right over the date line with the high pressure bias at 120 east, the exact opposite again of today. Now 1990, a kind of more just neutral year. Sea surface temperatures were in the Nino 3.4 region were about 0.3 of a degree above normal. So the low pressure bias still over the date line, but not nearly as robust. The low pressure bias over the maritime continent. Let's go look at a couple more. 1993, same sort of deal. Low pressure bias over the date line, high pressure bias over the maritime continent. Water temperatures were about the same thing, 0.3 of a degree above normal. So even just a little bit above normal suggests that the low pressure bias is over the date line. And that does a lot for storm and swell production and energy transfer into the jet stream. 1997, another super El Nino year. You can watch the transition here from January with the low pressure bias like we are today over the maritime continent. And then as you go through the spring and into the summer, massive low pressure bias building just south of California at 120 west. And as you get deep into December, fully in control, massive high pressure bias over the maritime continent. And drought would be assumed to be there in Australia, where we get flooding in California in this scenario. And then a year later, the complete reversal. We're in January of 98. El Nino is still solid over the East Pacific and then fading as we get into the summer. And then the low pressure bias sets up over the maritime continent. They get all their precipitation. And the high pressure bias sets up strong over the date line and the East Pacific, and dryness returns to California. So then we look at our current situation. We'll just pull all this stuff out of here, and here you go. High pressure bias over the East Pacific, low pressure bias over the maritime continent. The point being, this is pretty much the typical La Nina scenario. Then you just flip these, you stick the low pressure bias on about the date line and the high pressure bias over 120, and that's where you are in a typical, we'll say modest El Nino situation. And the low pressure bias just gets stronger and fills more of the Pacific Basin as you get into stronger and stronger El Ninos. All right, that's our history lesson for this week. So let's go look at the practical effects of the high and the low pressure bias, El Nino, La Nina, in the ocean. We're looking at subsurface temperatures down in the Pacific Ocean on the equator, West Pacific here, East Pacific here, down 100, 200, 300 meters. The colors are temperatures. These little lines here are anchors on the TAA buoy array. The X's are the actual sensors on the anchor lines. Take all that data, use it with a model, and you can get a profile of what subsurface temperatures look like. Warmer temperatures, 29 degree isotherm at 170 east today. That's about where it was last week. The 28 degree isotherm, about 177 west, about where it was last week. The 26 degree isotherm at 125. I think it's actually moved off, or 127. I think it was at 132 last week. So a little bit of warm water shifting off to the east. And then the 4 degree isotherm pushing into Ecuador. Pretty much no change from last week. But it's not the actual temperatures, the anomalies. Differences from normal for this time of year. You can see it here pretty clearly. Warm water in the West Pacific, 2 degrees centigrade. That's centigrade. So that's pretty, what is that? 4 plus degrees Fahrenheit. Warmer water in the West Pacific flowing the whole way under the equator across the Pacific with a warm bolus of warm water off of Ecuador at 3, almost 4 degrees above normal. That is the classic signs of a Kelvin wave. Now, for quite a bit of time, there's been nothing but cold water over here. The typical La Nina sort of syndrome, that appears to be not the case, at least at the moment. Another model using the same data suggests, here we go, zoom that in a little bit. So there's the Kelvin wave, still very solid, pushing from the West Pacific. Where's the date line? Right there. Over to the east, moving to about 105 west. Last week it was at 110, so you can actually see this moving east. The last little lingering remnants of La Nina cold water hanging here at about 90 west. That's just south of the Galapagos, getting squeezed up to the surface, bleeding out here, and probably maybe another week or two and they'll all be gone and warm water will take over. We think this Kelvin wave is moving incredibly slow though, so it doesn't have a lot of momentum behind it, but it appears to have a good volume of warm water behind it. Sea height anomalies, the sphere of the ocean. Get rid of the wind waves, get rid of the waves, get rid of the tide. And is the sphere of the ocean higher or lower or normal? That can tell you some things. So Chile here, Peru here, Central America, Hawaii right there, the equator there, dateline right there, New Guinea right there. All right, so the yellows, oranges are positive anomalies. The sea surface height is higher than normal. What that typically means is if you have warm water at depth, it expands, it pushes the water above it up and creates a bulge on the ocean surface. So on the equator here in the West Pacific, we see a lot of warm water, and you see a finger of it here making, well, there's the Galapagos right there, making it almost to the Galapagos. A little bit of a negative anomaly here by the Galapagos, meaning sea surface heights are a little bit depressed, cold water contracts, creates a divot on the ocean surface, and that's what this is reflecting. So more data confirming what we saw in the previous images. Upper ocean heat anomalies, the upper 300 meters of the ocean surface. Pacific, West Pacific here, East Pacific here. Greens colder than normal, reds, yellows warmer than normal. You can see warm water pulled up in the West Pacific. Then in December, we got a Kelvin wave. You see the warm water pushing from the West Pacific the whole way across to Ecuador. Pretty thin in week one. And then we had an upwelling phase after that of cold water, easterly anomalies the whole way through the spring. But now you see our next Kelvin wave slowly working its way off to the east to about 107 west today, maybe 105, kind of hard to tell, somewhere in that vicinity. And the expectation it will continue its way across the Pacific, supposedly dampening trade winds some and helping to feed perhaps the demise of La Nina. Upper ocean heat anomalies, just a different chart over time. You can see cold water. This is the entire Pacific from the dateline off to almost to Ecuador, maybe the Galapagos, a little bit east of there, a little bit west of there. Back in September, October of last year, last fall, cold water in control of the entire Pacific. We had a Kelvin wave back there in February, warmed up temperatures. They crashed, but they didn't crash as far. Notice the trend line steadily upward. Here's our Kelvin wave now pushing water temperatures up a little bit higher. We expect a crash after that, and then what happens after that is unknown, but we think we're going to be moving in the right direction. Now we know down at depth there's a lot of warm water, but the surface not really reflecting that yet, okay? Chile, Peru, Central America, Hawaii, equator right here. There's your Galapagos right there. Cold water, and it's just on the equator, 5 degrees north and south on the equator across the Pacific Ocean. That's what makes the difference in everything. That controls the jet stream, which controls the storm track, and so that's why we focus so intently in this area. You see little bits of cold water right off the Galapagos. That's that last remaining bits of the La Nina cool pool being pushed to the surface. We know there is a wall of warm water starting right about here, covering this entire area below the ocean surface, down about 100, 200 meters. Where on the ocean surface it's cold. Bits of that Kelvin wave in spots are already starting to gurgle up on the equator, getting caught by the trades, dragged off to the west. But still, there's a large volume of cool water, and that in general is having the upper hand. This warm water, this is only a couple of weeks old. This cool water has been here for a couple of years, fed by La Nina and reinforcing the La Nina signature in the atmosphere. The trend for the past couple of days, you see, and it's just on the equator we care about, though you see lots of warming up north. It's what happens here that drives the global atmospheric machine. We see warming along the Galapagos, a little pocket of cooling, but generally a building slowly building warming trend in the Nino 1.2 region. That's right here off of Peru and Ecuador. Nino 3.4 region, 120 west out to 170 west, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. So you can say Nino 1.2, Nino 3.4 here, Kelvin wave generation area off in here. And then the overview, again, warming trying to get established. A week's worth of warming is not going to do anything to like change the jet stream or anything like that. You need 5 months of that before the jet stream goes, hey, something's going on, because you're trying to change the jet stream pattern around the whole planet, right? So a little bit of warming here isn't going to make a whole lot of difference. So it's a step in the right direction, but we need this to persist for months, and we need these cold waters here to start turning more neutral. We think that's going to happen, but it's going to be a while in coming. Sea surface temperature trend in the Nino 1.2 area, right up there along the Galapagos and Ecuador. Temperatures, 1.662 degrees below normal. You got to be at half a degree below normal or above for 5 consecutive months to be out of La Nina. We're not there in this region, but this is the official El Nino region, the Nino 3.4 area. Today, 314 thousandths of a degree below normal. We're out of La Nina territory, but for only 1, 2, 3.5 weeks, something like that. Again, you got to be there for 5 months. We're not there yet, but we are trending in the right direction. Let's hope that it holds. So what does the atmosphere think is going on? We know there's a little bit of warming on the equator, but there's still a preponderance of cold water over most of the equatorial Pacific. So we look at the difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. Darwin in the Indian Ocean, Tahiti in the Pacific Ocean. When pressure is lower in Tahiti, the index goes negative. When it's higher in Tahiti, the index goes positive. Today, we're at 10, positive 10.03. We were up to, 26, 31. You get the idea. We do this every week. It's been high for a long time. We want to see this can go down and continue to go down. This is a bit noisy. 30-day average takes some of the erraticness out of the index. You can see it's at 17, plus 17.51. That's where it's been basically for a month. So we think it's probably pretty close to peaking out, or it has peaked out. The 90-day average is your El Nino La Nina indicator, plus 18.35. We were up to 18.4, and I think we're still going up. So, but this is a lagging indicator. This is a 90-day average, right? So it's over 3 months, but clearly indicating that we're at the peak of La Nina. This is higher than it was last year, for sure, by a good margin. We were up at like 15.5 last year. So this year's La Nina, even worse than last year, and happening later in the year, too. So we want to see this heading down as well. Here's the 30-day SOI graphed out, just to put things in perspective. This steady upward trend over the past 2 years, quite obvious. There's our peak. There's last year's peak. This is at 20. Other index we look at said about 15, but you get the general idea. We're higher this year yet again. The downward spikes are the active phase of the MJO. The upward spikes are the inactive phase. We're noodling around somewhere up in the highest of high territory for La Nina. What that can only mean pretty much one thing. It can't be sustained for too long. Eventually, the atmosphere will say this is an unsustainable situation, and then it will crash to at least neutral, if not towards El Nino. So what is the sea surface temperature forecast in the official El Nino monitoring region, the Nino 3.4 region, for the coming months? All right, well, here we are. We're not even in mid-July. According to this model, this is from the CFS model, temperatures today, 3/4 of a degree below normal. We know that to not be true. We know they're up somewhere around in here. So this is already cold biased right from the get-go. It suggests temperatures, if anything, once this Kelvin wave erupts, the temperatures will fall, and that's probably about right. Falling, though, to -1 degree as we get into October and November. But from there on out, it's over. La Nina collapses and sea surface temperatures warm. But we know this is a bad image, and NOAA knows it too. They have a PDF corrected version where they show temperatures continuing to warm into, this would be almost the early part of August, something like that, down to 0.6 of a degree below normal. Still not under the not even above the La Nina threshold. But again, we know temperatures today, that'd be right about here, are up at about 0.3 of a degree. So even this seems a bit cold biased. Temperatures, again, falling in October to November into about three-quarters of a degree below normal, and then heading upward from there. How far upward? Well, theoretically to neutral, maybe something more. We'll see. So what's the practical implications of that in terms of the ocean? So we go here. As of right now, this is our July image. You see much colder than normal water off of, let's go South America, Chile, Peru, Central America, Hawaii, Equator, dateline. Much colder temperatures here. And then we'll just go, let's go back and we'll just click through these. You can see pretty much the same, but notice temperatures warming here in the Galapagos as we get into August. September, more warming, and the depth of the coldness here not as strong. October, temperatures much warmer overall. And when you get this sort of a crash in temperatures, the atmosphere will already start responding. In November, even more of the same. By the time you get to December here, neutral temperatures over the entire equator, except for this last little remaining pocket here. This sort of suggests, now let's go back to where we are today. Notice the depth of the cooling there compared to this, which is really pretty much nothing. And this is in December. The atmosphere should probably start responding to these changes as we get into, let's say, November, something like that. By the time, and we've said this before, by the time you get in January and February, we expect the jet stream will wake up, and all of a sudden, I wouldn't say the floodgates will open, but you'll notice, theoretically, a better, more consistent winter storm pattern in the North Pacific. You'll start to see rain creeping down from Northern California deeper into the California. Maybe snow building up, not early in the season, probably be a dry early snow season for California. But as you get in January and February, you almost get the sense of, hey, maybe we're back in a somewhat normal pattern. At least that's what this model, again, this is all model data going out 6 months. Don't know how much you want to believe it, but the flip side is when La Nina's been raging as hard as it has been, as long as it has been, at some point the dam has to break. And looking at that Kelvin wave under the equator, one might think the dam is already on the verge of breaking. All right, so let's reset. What's happening immediately? Well, the good news is, yeah, we're in La Nina, but we're getting gales and things are happening in the South Pacific. We're in summer months, right? 2 gales forecast over the next 4 to 5 days with seas in the 36 to 39 foot range. More swell likely to be generated, taking a week to get into Hawaii and 8 to 9 days into the U.S. West Coast. And then swell for 5 or 6 days or more after that once it arrives. So things looking pretty good. Kind of this next coming week, not a whole lot of surf. I mean, not even any wind swell relative to California. So pretty good time to go take care of business. But the good news is swell is on the way. Looking further out, well, big Kelvin wave under the equator, poised to erupt off of Ecuador and the Galapagos. And the models all suggest that, if anything, La Nina, yeah, maybe having a minor resurgence in the October-November timeframe, but from a practical application standpoint, volume and the intensity of cold water in the equatorial Pacific, pretty much from here forward, slowly fading out, suggesting that as we get deeper into winter, maybe we'll eke out something that almost resembles normalcy. All right, so that's our forecast for this week. If you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. We'd appreciate it. Comments always welcome. Remember, if you're thinking it, 10 other people are too, so right in there. We'll do our best to respond. Subscribe. You'll get automatic notifications when we post the video. If not, go to stormsurf.com. You'll see the link at the top of every page of the website for the video, and we typically do it on Sunday evenings. All right, that's it for this week. Have a safe and happy 4th of July, and we'll see you next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.